Good afternoon, everyone. This is Dr. Jeff Gelblum, your friendly neurologist down here in South Florida, Miami. And we're here today to talk about something that I think we all consider to be groundbreaking. Yesterday, for those of you who were watching the news, was a very important day in medical history. And that's because yesterday the FDA approved a new drug for the treatment of Alzheimer's disease. So purpose of today's discussion is to take you through what that new drug is, how that new drug works, and to see if this is going to be a holy grail for all individuals with Alzheimer's, or if this is something that's going to have specific indications for specific folks. As far as I'm concerned, this is going to be a combination of the two. So sit tight over the next 30 minutes because we've got a lot of information to cover. And I want to make sure that if you have any specific questions, that they're all answered. Because all of us on today's discussion know someone who has Alzheimer's disease, either a family member, a loved one, a friend, a spouse. So this is a condition that impacts all of us. In fact, a couple weeks ago, the President Biden, said that Alzheimer's is going to account for most of the hospital beds tied up in the next few decades here in the U.S., as well as the industrialized world. So make no mistake, the macroeconomic as well as the social implications, the life implications of Alzheimer's disease are devastating. So what's the first point of information? Why is this such a monumental discussion? Why are we here today, Tuesday, June 8, 2021, to discuss a drug? What's new and exciting about this? Well, what's very important is that the last time we neurologists ever got a drug for Alzheimer's disease was 2003. And I don't know how many of you have been involved with patients with Alzheimer's, but really up until today, or I should say up until yesterday, there were only two drugs that we had access to that could have any type of symptomatic improvement, or I wouldn't even say improvement, but let's say stabilization. For the past 20 years almost, the only thing that we neurologists have had access to is a drug that raises up a brain level of acetylcholine, which is a neurotransmitter that we think may be helpful for short-term memory. That drug is called, or has been called, Aricept, so that's been around for over 20 years. And the other drug that we had access to was something called Namenda, which lowers levels of a brain chemical called glutamate, which we've hypothesized may have problems of brain irritation. That's it. That's what we've had for the past 2 decades. And for all of us in the Alzheimer business, all of us neurologists, as well as all of you who've had to deal with the devastation of this disease among family and friends, you know that those drugs didn't really treat the underlying condition. All they basically did was stabilize some of the symptomatology for a period of time, and then the problem just bursted out and patients ended up in a nursing home. So that's where we've been for the past 20 years. And I want to remind you that there's a significant difference between Alzheimer's and just plain old-fashioned age-related forgetfulness. As I always say, forgetfulness is, I forgot what I did or where I put my car keys last night. Alzheimer's is when you find the keys and you don't exactly know what they're for. So that's the difference between forgetfulness and Alzheimer's disease. Alzheimer's disease is a form of dementia. Dementia is defined as short-term memory loss plus something else. Problems with visuospatial. That's why grandma gets lost when she drives. Problems with praxis, or doing daytime customary activities. That's why grandpa has difficulty taking a shower. He doesn't know what is the hot and what is the cold spigot on the shower. It's also a problem with learning. That's why mom can't often understand how to use that new iPhone. So dementia is defined as a problem of short-term memory plus something else, one other functional domain: learning, language, visuospatial, praxis, meaning customary daily activities. So dementia is the devastating disease. There are different causes of dementia. Alzheimer's is the most common, but if you know anyone who's had a stroke, they can have dementia. Folks with advanced Parkinson's can get dementia. People who've had traumatic gunshot wounds to the brain, obviously they've had dementia. People who've had infections of the brain, encephalitis, for example, they can have dementia. People who have cancer disorders can have dementia. But we're here today to talk about Alzheimer's. So what is the difference between Alzheimer's and the other forms of dementia? Alzheimer's, we believe at this point, is a genetic tendency to manufacture plaques, basically little gumballs that muck up the works of the brain. And we've tried over many, many years to come up with drug strategies that will stop those plaques from forming, because many of us, not all of us, but many of us in the neurological field believe that these plaques represent the underlying genetic cascade, the sequence of events that leads to brain destruction. And we see these plaques as a hallmark, otherwise known as a biomarker. We see these plaques as a hallmark of the disease that we know clinically to be Alzheimer's. So what's new and exciting about this drug that was FDA approved yesterday? Well, this drug actually lowers the amount of plaque in the brain, the amount of amyloid plaque in the brain. Amyloid plaque is the fundamental pathophysiology that is addressed by this new drug. Now, I want to make it very clear. Amyloid plaque is not the only part of the Alzheimer's, it's not the only component of the Alzheimer's story. There are other components, other proteins that we believe may cause the brain injury that results in the clinical picture of Alzheimer's. But right now, amyloid plaque sits front and center, and amyloid plaque is considered to be the focus of the new drug. It's called aducanumab, for those of you who want to know the name. Aducanumab, it's a monoclonal antibody, and it essentially is infused. It's an injection, and it crosses the blood-brain barrier, and what it actually does is dissolve the plaques in the brain. So you're saying right now, oh my gosh, this is the best thing since sliced bread. This is the holy grail, and this is the magical cure. Well, it's not. Because we believe that there is a lot more to the Alzheimer's story than just lowering the plaque burden. And that's borne out by a lot of the clinical trials. What we've seen so far is that patients who receive this specific drug, as well as other chemical cousins of this new drug, all of them in development for treatment of Alzheimer's disease, that those individuals get better, but they're not cured. So we're not sitting here today having a discussion about an Alzheimer's cure. I wish we could have that discussion, but we cannot. So I don't want you to walk away from this Facebook Live today and say, oh, Dr. Gelblum said there's a new cure for Alzheimer's disease. That is not the case. What we know is this drug has significant effect in dissolving, in lowering the plaques of the Alzheimer brain patient. And that in and of itself has been shown in the clinical trials which were conducted to improve cognitive functioning in these patients. Now, that's not saying that once grandpa starts the aducanumab, he's going to turn into Albert Einstein. That's not going to happen. I mean, unless he is Albert Einstein. But what we do know is that there is statistical, meaningful, important improvement in those patients who have amyloid plaque causing an Alzheimer's diagnosis. So I just said three very important things: amyloid plaque, Alzheimer's diagnosis, drug, new drug. And I want to remind you that not everybody with dementia has amyloid plaque, and not everybody with dementia has the Alzheimer's type of dementia. There are other types of dementia, all under clinical investigation right now. I made mention before of stroke-related dementia, Parkinson's dementia. There's a rare form of dementia called frontotemporal dementia, and that's where the frontal lobe and the temporal lobe, the language speaking part and the language comprehension part, frontal, temporal. Always take your lecture from a bald neurologist so we can point to all the areas of the brain that are involved. So in a frontotemporal dementia, it's primarily a language disorder as well as a mood and emotional condition because of frontal and temporal lobe dysfunction. So that's a different dementia altogether. So for today, with this new drug that was released yesterday, we must focus on Alzheimer dementia in those individuals who are amyloid plaque positive. Now, other folks have dementia, but they may not necessarily have the amyloid plaque. So you say to yourself, well, how do we even figure out if my father has an amyloid plaque? Well, that's not a very hard thing to do, thank heavens, because nowadays we can figure that out either by a PET scan of the brain. There's a special type of PET scan called an amyvid scan, AMYVID, which is FDA approved. We give you a little bit of radioactive tracer, you go in the scanning machine, and we can see if you've got amyloid plaque. And if you've got amyloid plaque and you have clinical features of dementia, that's where we come in as part of our exam. So the machine tells us about the plaque, Dr. Gelblum tells you about the dementia, and with that, you may be a candidate for this new drug. I can tell you right off the bat that without the plaque and without the Alzheimer diagnosis, this drug is certainly not indicated for you. And there are other patients with an Alzheimer-like disorder that don't necessarily have the amyloid plaque as it shows up on the scan. And in those individuals, sometimes we even have to do a lumbar puncture, a spinal tap, to see if we can find some remnants of the plaque, some remnant proteins in the spinal fluid. And if that's positive, then we can say there's amyloid plaque, but it's just not coming up on the scan. Suffice it to say that you've got to have the amyloid plaque and you've got to have the clinical diagnosis of Alzheimer's in order to even be a candidate for this drug. So circle around. This drug is not for everyone. And there are some conflicting data about this drug. This was not an easy pass through the FDA. So let me explain to you a little bit about where that conflict has been. In order to bring a drug to market, two independent studies, two studies looking at two different populations, both with the same or similar endpoint. What happened in this drug is one study was positive and one study was not positive. And we think that that's because of differences in dosing of medication. So what happened was the FDA decided to take the positive study and look at higher dosing. And with that, we got endpoints that showed statistical significant improvement in those patients who received the drug, those Alzheimer patients who received the drug, those with amyloid plaques and clinical diagnoses of Alzheimer's. In that group, those patients who received the higher dose did better than the placebo group. And they did better to a statistical degree that meant significant better. And on that basis, the drug was approved yesterday. However, there are many of my colleagues who say, well, wait a second. How is it that the FDA can allow an approval on one study and not two studies when you always require two studies? What's going on here? The FDA understands that there may be conflicts in the data. This is not a perfect drug. As I said, this drug is not for everyone. And the data that support the drug approval is not perfect data. One study's up, one study's down. We have to kind of reconcile the two studies. Individuals such as myself tend to embrace the positive study, saying, well, look, it's a phenomenon of dosing that we're going to have to be careful about getting our patients to the higher dose and then to monitor for effects and side effects. There are other physicians, other neurologists who say, wait a second, I'm not even going to look at this because unless you bring me two convincing studies, I'm not even going there. So both schools have to be respected. I can tell you I'm of the school that says the positive study is convincing enough that I'm willing to offer this as a treatment opportunity for my patients who have the amyloid plaque and have an Alzheimer's diagnosis. But there are plenty of neurologists, justifiably so, who say, look, I'm not going to go there unless you give me 2 positive studies. We don't have the 2 positive studies at this point. So therefore, what the FDA has said is that going forward, for those individuals who are going to be on this drug, we're going to have to do what's called a phase 4 trial. Now, you've all heard about phase 3 trials of the FDA. That's what gets the drug approved. Phase 2 is a dosing trial where we figure out what the doses are. And phase 1 is a safety trial. So whenever something's released, it comes at the heels of a phase 3 clinical trial, usually 2, where you've got a statistical significant improvement in the treatment group versus the placebo. Well, we don't have those 2 trials. We've only got 1. But on that basis, because of the extraordinary need in the treatment space for Alzheimer's disease, the FDA approved it yesterday. But what we're going to have to do going forward, as mandated by the FDA, is we're going to have to perform a phase 4 clinical trials, which means that certain individuals who receive the drug are going to have to be closely monitored to see what their benefits are and what their side effects are. And if we see longitudinally, over the long haul, no significant benefit, then the FDA reserves the right to rescind the approval. So again, this is not slam dunk medicine. We're not here today to say we've invented the best thing since sliced bread and everybody with Alzheimer's is going to be cured. We are not saying that at this point. What we've got is a brand new class of drug that is specific for the amyloid plaque, which we think may be a biomarker, meaning a signal of Alzheimer's disease intensity or severity and duration. And if we can somehow bring that plaque down, then our patients should improve. That is what was stated in the second trial of the drug, and that endpoint was met. It was not met in the first trial. So again, those of us in the neurology field are dealing with conflicting data. If you have a loved one with Alzheimer's disease and you feel that they would be interested in exploring the use of this drug, then you should probably speak with a neurologist who's interested in prescribing this drug. I can tell you our group at First Choice Neurology, many of us are very interested in prescribing this drug. So therefore, you have to make sure that your family member is referred to a doctor who's at least going to have this type of discussion where we say, look, there's no guarantees, but the data as it's being presented and as we've recently seen is compelling enough for me to recommend that we start this drug. So what's involved with the drug? It's not a pill. It's a monthly infusion. You'd have to go and get an IV on a monthly basis, probably for the rest of your life. And we'd have to do some pre-screening tests, which would include that clinical exam that we neurologists do each and every day in our office when we tap you on the knee with a reflex hammer and we put a tuning fork to your ear. And then, of course, there's probably going to be the component of that amyloid PET scan of the brain that looks to see at the amyloid plaque burden, the quantity and distribution of the amyloid plaques. If all those 3 boxes are met, then in all likelihood you qualify for the drug, and then we would start the drug. So as an old professor of mine said, for a medicine to have effects, it's going to have some side effects. So what are the major side effects of this drug? Well, the major side effects in the higher dose, which is probably the efficacy dose, the dose that works, the major side effects can be some brain swelling. Nothing irreversible and nothing that we can't control. That's why once we get started on this drug with the patient, we're going to follow that patient very carefully, and we may have to do some follow-up MRIs to make sure that there's no brain swelling, because if there is, we're going to obviously have to stop the drug. And then you have to say, all right, so Gelblum's prescribing it, I'm a candidate, let's go. We've got all the bells and whistles in place for the scanning and the infusions and all of that. Well, the bottom line question that we always have to ask is, how much is it going to cost and who's going to pay for it? Well, I can tell you right now, as of this time, 12:51 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, June 8, 2021, I don't have that answer. The FDA approved it yesterday. Medicare is looking at it today, as is every insurance payer in our country. And they're figuring out a way, or going to have to figure out a way, to pay for it. So that problem is being addressed right now. So if you call my office this afternoon and say, I want to bring my mom in to see you, Dr. Gelblum, because I'm concerned about Alzheimer's and I heard about this new drug and I want her started tomorrow, that's not going to happen. Because A, the drug has been approved, but B, we are not quite sure about the mechanism of payment for the drug. You're not going to go to Walgreens and pick up the drug and bring me back a little vial of it and say, okay, ready to infuse. That's not going to happen. And if you've been reading the news, right now, the drug is priced at a few $1,000s per month. Now, that could come down. That's all going to have to be negotiated between Medicare and the manufacturer of the medicine, which is Biogen, a pharmaceutical company out of Massachusetts. But all of this is being negotiated right now. And I can guarantee you, if you know insurance companies the way I know insurance companies, they're not just going to say, all right, here's the blank check. Go get whatever you need and tell Dr. Gelblum to infuse up to his heart's content. That's not going to happen. So we're going to have to make sure that our documentation is in place. We're going to have to make sure that our ability to diagnose correctly is in place. We're going to have to make sure that our follow-up is in place. And we're going to have to make sure that the patient is able to come in on a periodic basis to be assessed for benefit as well as side effects. So all of this has to be put in place. The good news is large neurology groups such as ours, First Choice Neurology, have all of these bells and whistles in place to make sure that if you or a loved one is a candidate, we can implement that. So we are poised. We've seen this handwriting on the wall. We've known about this drug for a long time, and we've followed this data literally day in and day out. So we are poised at this point to be able to provide this drug, if it's appropriate, to you or a loved one, assuming that the insurance back-end situation has been figured out, which I'm certain it will, in no time at all. There's still a lot of questions going on, and I know a lot of you are scratching your head saying, I'm watching this Facebook Live with this neurologist, and he's saying there's one positive data, there's a negative data, maybe I'll get it, maybe I won't, maybe they'll pay for it, maybe they won't. The conversation, the information is changing on a daily basis. So this is what we know as of 12:55 p.m., June 8, 2021. We may know more by the end of this week in terms of Medicare payment, in terms of contraindications, in terms of dosing, in terms of how it's going to be delivered. We may know more by the end of the week. But I wanted to come to you right now because many of you saw the news yesterday. It's all over the media. And I want to make sure that you have access to a neurologist to discuss this topic, as impacts many of our families, friends, and loved ones. So here's what we've set up for all of you. We have this system in place called Neuro2Go, Neuro, number 2, go, neuro2go.com. You can go online. You can schedule an appointment for yourself, cousin Mabel, Uncle Jim, your neighbor next door, to discuss what we know about this drug and to see if it would be valuable for you or your family. It's not an appointment. It's a neuro chat, just a discussion where we can talk about some of the signs and symptoms of your family and to see if a neurological consultation evaluation would be necessary. And this Neuro2Go platform works worldwide. You can do it from Mongolia, or you can do it from Minnesota, or you can do it from Mexico. Just do it on Eastern Daylight Time so I'm not talking to you at 4 o'clock in the morning, because then I don't know what I'm going to say. But with that being said, we've got the system in place to provide as much information as we have at this point in time, with the understanding being that that information can change as we move forward over the next 2 weeks. We believe that the drug will be able to be infused in about 2 weeks. And at that time, we'll have the issues worked out with the payers and with Medicare and how the drug's going to be delivered and where you will go for the infusion. So time is of the essence here. We are working very quickly and diligently to make sure that as soon as this drug is available to you, which should be in the next 14 days, that those patients who are appropriate for the product will get the product and be able to be monitored during their course of receipt of the product. Again, recapping, this drug is not for everybody. There's conflicting data regarding its use. So again, not the Holy Grail here, but certainly we've got enough positive information that we can think about a new Alzheimer treatment because we haven't thought about that for 2 decades. So this is a very exciting time, and I want to remind you that there are other drugs coming down the pike that are very similar to this new product, aducanumab, that may be even better. And what I always like in this scenario too, see, if you go to an old neurologist like myself, we've been around, we've seen a lot of things over many years. When HIV first came out, or I should say when HIV started, we had no drugs. People were dying. And then there was this miracle product called AZT, which really turned HIV from a death sentence into a treatable condition. And now HIV, really, we don't even call it AIDS anymore. We call it HIV, and it should be asymptomatic because we've got these fantastic products that can keep that HIV virus at bay indefinitely so that there's absolutely no symptomatology whatsoever. So where we are right now, I liken to the day of AZT when it was launched for AIDS. Before that, AIDS was a death sentence. Then, on the day of AZT launch, HIV became treatable. Now, HIV is a silent condition, and you take a pill every day, and you're good to go for an indefinite period of time. Thank heavens. So, we're at that point right now with Alzheimer's disease. So, monumental day, extraordinary time, a drug that can be carefully used in the right population. I look forward to doing so. I have a question from Leah. How come they came out with a medicine so quickly with COVID? Leah, there's no medicine for COVID. There are vaccines for COVID, and it's not hard to develop a vaccine technology as long as you have the DNA sequence of a virus. And I can tell you that the COVID virus is a very simple DNA sequence, very easy to make a vaccine against because vaccine technology has been around for 75, 80 years. So there's a far more complex situation going on in Alzheimer's than there is with COVID. So with that being said, it's been a long, arduous road, but a very exciting road. And I look forward to meeting with any of you on a neuro chat like Neuro2Go, as do my colleagues. Or if you want to come over to the office or bring your loved ones to the office for a consultation, we're here at First Choice Neurology to make sure that no one goes undiagnosed and that those individuals who are appropriate candidates for this new aducanumab product will get that product as necessary. So I thank you. Again, I'm going to be coming back to you probably in a week or two to give you an update regarding accessibility, affordability, and all the other issues that are still up in the air because the powers that be are still looking at it. So I appreciate your time today, and I look forward to seeing with you soon. Thanks again. Bye-bye.